On today's episode, it's part one of my updated Blackhawks prospects list, where I'll go through which prospects I have ranked between numbers 16 and 20 in the organization.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to yet another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and check me out on X at Jack Bushman2, but make sure to go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account. That's at Talkin' Hockey. You can also go and click down in the description for an easy link to that page, so that way you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And I also got to give one final shout out to today's sponsor, which is Monarch Money. Go and take control of your finances right now by using our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps at monarchmoney.com. You'll also get 50% off on your first year. All right, Blackhawks fans, happy Monday. Hope each and every one of you out there had just a wonderful weekend. To kick things off on the show today, I'm very excited to get into part one of what will be a 4-part series here this week, going through my Chicago Blackhawks Summer 2025 top prospects list. Something I've teased here for these last couple of weeks. One of my favorite segments that I do a couple of different times throughout the course of the year. And leading up to this, I've also covered a few different Blackhawks prospects lists that have been released here this summer from the likes of Ben Pope of the Chicago Sun-Times, one of my favorite Blackhawks beat writers. I also went through a list from Stephen Ellis of Elite Prospects, as well as how Scott Wheeler had things kind of sorted out in his top 100 drafted NHL prospects ranking, just to give you all an idea of how some others are seeing things in the Blackhawks pipelines before getting into my own list here today. And while I've also been kind of teasing that, maybe this would be a top 10 list this time around, you all probably know me better than that at this point, right? No way I'm going to be doing a top 10 considering how deep this prospect pool is. I'll be doing a top 20 once again, like I've been doing since the end of the 2022-23 season. But before I get into things here, real quick, couple of details that I wanted to bring up first. For those of you who are new to the channel and haven't seen any of my previous Blackhawks prospect rankings, I like to go through things in reverse order, which I know is a little bit anticlimactic for all of you out there as the audience, but like the NFL going through the top 100, I really do think I'd be doing myself a little bit of a disservice if I just gave you all the top 5, top 10 right away, right? I think it would drag down some of those later episodes a little bit. So while I know that could be frustrating for me personally, it does make the most sense. And after all, this is my show, right? And then a couple of prospect exclusions from the list I wanted to make sure you were all aware of. Obviously, no Connor Bedard, hasn't been part of my prospects list for a couple of years now. No Frank Nazar this time around either, as he's pretty clearly past the prospect stage at this point, right? I think we all expect him to be the Blackhawks second line center when the regular season opens up. Wyatt Kaiser also will not be a part of this list. I took him off at the midway point of the 24-25 campaign, which honestly might have been a little bit too soon. I maybe should have waited until the end of last year, but ultimately, as I've been outspoken about a couple of different times this summer, I was thrilled with everything I saw from Kaiser this last year, and I really do think he's at the point where he's ready to be a full-time NHLer. Dominic James is also someone who I had put in the honorable mentions category, which I'll get into here in just a second. I also had him ranked 20th, I believe, the last time I went through my Blackhawks prospects list. And since then, obviously, he elected to not sign his entry-level deal with the Blackhawks. They did reportedly give him an offer, but I'm guessing just because of the sheer depth of this prospect pool, Dominic James felt it was best for him to take his chances elsewhere. And once his rights expire on August 15th, he will be a UFA and will be allowed to choose his next destination. So because of that, obviously wouldn't make a lot of sense to keep him in my prospect list once again. And then I also wanted to mention someone who I had excluded in the past. I'm going to be bringing back in this time around, and that's Kevin Korchinski. I think I just wrongly removed him. It was just a mistake from my perspective. I removed him from the prospects list along with Connor Bedard after the 23-24 season, but I probably should have recognized that Korchinski wouldn't have been a full-time NHLer that year had he have been AHL eligible, and that's, of course, where he spent most of this last season developing right, and there's even, I think, a decent likelihood that's where he opens up the 25-26 season. Altogether, he is just not a fully established NHLer at this point. So I think it does make sense to put him back in my Blackhawks prospects list. So just a couple of details I wanted to make you all aware of here real quick before getting into the nitty gritty. But before I jump into number 20, like I do for each and every one of my lists, wanted to run through a couple of honorable mentions here real quick. Guys who didn't quite crack the top 20, but I still think are worth keeping an eye on here in the pipelines, right? Especially considering how many numbers, how deep this Blackhawks prospect pool has become over these last couple of seasons. So I usually go through 5 honorable mentions before starting off my list. I really could have had probably like 8, 9, or 10 prospects in here, but just to shorten things up a little bit, right, wanted to keep it down to 5. But the 5 honorable mentions that I wanted to bring up, guys who just didn't quite get into the top 20. Starting things off is Landon Slaggert, who we obviously saw in the NHL with the Blackhawks for a good chunk of last season. He was a 3rd-round pick, the 79th overall selection back in 2020, now listed at 6 foot, around 180 pounds, and he turned 23 years old back in June. Played in 33 games with the Blackhawks last year altogether, tallying 6 points, 2 goals, and 4 assists. Also added 25 points, 10 goals, and 15 assists in 39 AHL games with the Rockford Ice Hogs. Pretty solid first full year of professional hockey. Saw a little bit of Slaggert in the NHL as well after the conclusion of his senior season with Notre Dame. I don't really think he has one defining trait or enough of a skill set to wind up in this top 20. I just think there are more talented prospects, but I do think Slaggert has a chance to be an NHLer down on the 4th line if he makes the most of his opportunities these next couple of years. He has some decent speed to him, decent size as well, 6 foot, 180, nothing special, but handles himself well, I think, out there on the ice, but just not enough skill to fully have him inside the top 20 here, but is expected to be in the mix for one of those final forward roster spots to open up this upcoming season. Then I also have Martin Misiak here in my honorable mention segment for the 2nd consecutive ranking. He's a 6'2", 200-pound center. That was a 2nd-round pick for the Blackhawks not all that long ago. 55th overall selection in the 2023 NHL draft. Is going to turn 21 here in just a couple of months in September. And he's coming off a pretty solid season in the OHL with the Erie Otters. 59 points in 60 games, 23 goals, and 36 assists. But probably did his best work in the final couple of weeks of the regular season and throughout the OHL playoffs before, unfortunately, he suffered an injury. He had 13 points, 7 goals, and 6 assists in 8 games. And I want to say he even had like 11 points in his first 4 or 5 postseason contests. He was absolutely on fire for Erie to kick off their playoffs. But he will be making the leap to professional hockey this year after spending the last 2 years in the OHL with Erie. Was the 1st overall selection in the CHL import draft after being selected by the Blackhawks in the 2nd round. The reason I have Misiak, though, in this honorable mention segment, despite having 2 pretty good years with the Erie Otters, and while he does have, good size and good defensive play along with that, I think that'll give him a chance to be a 3rd-line center, good defensive-minded checking role winger for the Blackhawks. I just don't know if he brings a ton of skill to the table. He's never been a point-per-game guy in either, 59 points in 60 games, just shy of it, but didn't necessarily take the leap offensively altogether this past year that I wanted to see from him. I don't know if his offensive game is really going to translate over to the professional level, but I do think, again, because of his size, he already has a NHL-style body as he's above 200 pounds at 6'2", and because he does play a reliable defensive game for the most part, I think those aspects will give him a chance to be a third to fourth liner for the Blackhawks down the road. But again, like Landon Slaggert, I just think there are some more skilled prospects in the organization right now. But Martin Misiak still does have a chance to be an NHL puzzle piece for Chicago, and so does this guy, Samuel Savoie, who played in his first professional season last year with the Rockford Ice Hogs. He's a 5'10", 190-pound winger. Third round pick in 2022, was the 81st overall selection, and he just turned 21 years old back in March, so still relatively young. And he had 22 points, 7 goals, and 15 assists in 72 AHL games for Rockford last year. Missed most of the prior season, which was his final one in the QMJHL due to suffering a gruesome broken femur while playing with the Blackhawks in the preseason. And what Samuel Savoie is known for, of course, is just being an absolute goon out there on the ice. But I really do think, while he's never going to be a consistent point producer if he does make it to the NHL, he does have more skill and more speed. I think that's the biggest thing for him, the speed and the way that he can buzz all around the ice and cause havoc in numerous different ways. That's what's intriguing to the Blackhawks, because they really don't have a lot of guys like him. And also what I think will give him a chance to make it to that next level. He's a true wild card prospect here for the Blackhawks. Will be a fan favorite, though, undoubtedly, if he's not already, if he winds up making it to the NHL in Chicago. Another guy who probably unlikely he makes their NHL roster out of camp, but someone who's going to be fighting for one of those few jobs, and definitely worth keeping track of how things go for him in his second pro season, likely with the Rockford Ice Hogs. I also have Adam Gajan, a part of this list as well, for the second consecutive prospect rankings for me. He's a 6'2", 180-pound goaltender who the Blackhawks, of course, made the first goalie off the board in the 2023 NHL draft with the 35th overall selection. He also turned 21 recently back in May. Been a little bit of a struggle for Gajan, though, since being drafted by the Hawks. This past year as a freshman for Minnesota Duluth, he went 7-12-1 with a 3.33 goals against, .885 save percentage, and 1 shutout in 21 starts. Although I do think it's worth pointing out that Minnesota Duluth definitely had a down year as a team, so that definitely didn't really help Gajan's cause. But also, his final year in the USHL before making the leap to college hockey did not go very well either. So he had a 3.35 goals against, an .893 save percentage with the Green Bay Gamblers. Still very young in the development process, though. It would be foolish for the Blackhawks to quit on Gajan at this point in time, because he's very likely going to spend, at the very least, 2 more years in college hockey, if not 3. Still a lot of development for him to be having, even before he jumps onto the professional scene. But at the same point in time, has not been an ideal last couple of years for Adam Gajan. Hopefully he's got a big bounce back campaign in store here as a sophomore. And then rounding things out in my honorable mentions section, I have Nathan Bem, one of probably my favorite selection for the Blackhawks in day 2 of the 2025 NHL draft. He's a 6'2", 202-pound winger, was selected 66th overall, and still very young as well, just turned 18 in April, and he had 66 points, 31 goals, 35 assists in 59 WHL games for the Kamloops Blazers in his second full season in the O. Got off to a lightning hot start, was one of the best goal scorers and point producers in the, not the OHL, excuse me, the WHL, in the first month and a half before he kind of fizzled out down the stretch. But known as an offensive-minded winger who has some good size and is already well-rounded at over 200 pounds as a young 18-year-old man, I think there's a decent chance that Nathan Bem is going to be an NHLer, and hopefully it's a monstrous season for him in Kamloops before, maybe he even spends another 2 years with the Kamloops Blazers. We'll see how the Blackhawks want to go about things with him. It'll obviously likely be determined based on how well he performs this upcoming season. But Nathan Bem, Adam Gajan, Samuel Savoie, Martin Misiak, and Landon Slaggert, guys that didn't wind up in my top 20, but I do still think are worthwhile prospects inside the Blackhawks pool. But that takes care of all of my honorable mentions here, Blackhawks fans. Coming up in just a moment, I'll get into the good stuff and we'll start breaking down numbers 20 through 16 on my list. But first, real quick, I got to talk to you all about Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and complete control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center so that you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place so you can stop just managing your money and start building wealth. And what I personally love about Monarch is that instead of juggling multiple financial apps at the same point in time, you can just use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals. So go and take control of your finances right now with Monarch Money and use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get 50% off on your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com with our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get half off on your first year. Real quick, before I get into segment 2, just a reminder, if you enjoy what you're watching here on YouTube today, please go and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well, and also be on the lookout for part 2 of my Blackhawks Summer 2025 Top Prospects list dropping here tomorrow, where I'll be diving through numbers 11 through 15. Segment 2 on today's episode, though, Blackhawks fans, getting into the good stuff, breaking down numbers 20 through 16 in my Summer 2025 Blackhawks prospect list. Kicking things off at number 20, I have defenseman Nolan Allen, 6'2", 195-pound left-handed defenseman who's the 32nd overall pick for the Blackhawks in the 2021 NHL draft. They, of course, acquired that pick when they also got Seth Jones from the Columbus Blue Jackets, and Allen is now 22 years old, which he just turned back in April. Tallied 8 points, 1 goal, 7 assists in 43 NHL games last year for the Blackhawks. Also tallied 6 points, 2 goals, and 4 assists in 20 AHL games with Rockford. Also chipped in with 4 assists in 7 postseason games, and now has 2 years of pro hockey under his belt. Allen is a, physical, sizable, defensive-minded defenseman. I just don't know, kind of in a similar vein to Landon Slaggert, right? Like, I just don't know if he has enough to be a difference maker in a crowded prospect pool, right? I just think there are more talented prospects on the back end here compared to Nolan Allen. So that's why I have him so far down in the rankings. I just don't think he really offers a lot of offensive upside whatsoever, but because of his size, because of how sturdy he is, and because of his defensive prowess, does give him a chance to be an NHLer here with the Blackhawks. But if that is going to be the case, it's definitely going to be on the third pairing in kind of a limited defensive / penalty killing style role, because again, his puck skills and his offensive upside really just aren't there. But Nolan Allen kicking things off here for me at number 20. Coming in next at number 19, I have AJ Spellicy, 6'3", 204-pound forward who's played both center and wing so far in his junior career. Was a third-round selection for the Blackhawks in 2024, picked 72nd overall. The Blackhawks received this pick in the trade for Alex DeBrincat with the Ottawa Senators a couple of years ago. Might have drafted Paul Ludwinski a little bit too early with that 39th overall selection in 2022, but did a pretty good job here, in my opinion, with AJ Spellicy at number 72. Kid just turned 19 back in February. He had 37 points, 18 goals, 19 assists, and 62 OHL games for the Windsor Spitfires this year, which is actually down 1 point in terms of productivity that he had in his draft year. However, I do think because Windsor was just they were a much better team this past season than they were in AJ Spellicy's draft year. They probably didn't have to rely on him as much offensively. He might not have gotten as many offensive chances. And even altogether, that's not really what I'm expecting AJ Spellicy to ever be known for. What he is going to be known for is his speed and his physicality. He's a big boy already at a young age, super athletic, right? Was obviously like Mason West, but in a different vein, was recruited heavily to be a football player in Ohio, has a super big mold and is like very well-rounded for a 19-year-old. And he utilizes that to make his presence felt in many different ways all over the ice. However, I don't think AJ Spellacy, like I said, is ever going to be known for the offensive contributions. He doesn't have the highest offensive upside, but I do think there's a real good chance he's going to be a bottom six depth guy who makes his presence felt in lots of different ways. So that's why ultimately I have him over Nolan Allen. I think there is a little bit more skill there, and I do think there are more ways that AJ Spellacy will be able to provide value to the Blackhawks if he winds up being an NHLer. But again, just because of how deep this prospect pool is, given his lack of offensive upside, that's why I have him a little bit further down here at number 19. Next up at number 18 for me, I have Aiden Thompson. 5'11", 180-pound forward who was the 90th overall pick in 2022, late third-round selection for the Blackhawks as an overager, actually. And the Hawks also received this pick via a trade with the Calgary Flames. The Nikita Zadorov one from a handful of seasons ago. Pretty good value. This turned out to be for Chicago. And Thompson, a little bit older than most of the prospects in this list. He already turned 23 back in February, and he, of course, had a real sound junior season with Denver to help get them to the Frozen Four, one of the most productive players in all of the country, with 55 points, 21 goals, and 34 assists in 44 games, was on the top line all season long after mostly being utilized as a third-line checking role type of guy in his first 2 seasons with the Pioneers. So a really strong final year of college hockey before Aiden Thompson made the leap to the professional scene, signed a 2-year entry-level contract with the Blackhawks because of his age at the end of the season, and wound up joining on with the Rockford Ice Hogs, played in 4 regular season games, tallying 1 assist, but was very noticeable in the Calder Cup playoffs, scoring 2 goals and also adding 2 assists for 4 points in 7 postseason games. He's a pretty speedy, fast-thinking, offensive-minded forward who, again, because he was utilized mostly in a checking role his first couple of years with Denver, has kind of rounded out his game with some good defense as well. I do think there's a chance that Aiden Thompson contends for a, middle 6, bottom 6 roster spot for the Blackhawks. Just all about, we don't really know all too well at this point in time how his skills are going to translate over to the professional scene. It's just been too small of a stint, but I do think because of the uptick in offensive contributions and the productivity that he had last year, and also how well he looked, just immediately jumping onto the scene with the Rockford Ice Hogs in the most meaningful time of the year, that definitely gave me more confidence that Aiden Thompson can be a puzzle piece here in Chicago. But because he is already 23 years old, a lot older than most of these guys on the list, I do have him here at number 18. Ahead of both Spellacy and Allen, though, because he undoubtedly has the higher upside between those two. Coming in next at number 17, just ahead of Aiden Thompson, I have John Mustard, 6'1", 185-pound forward, who was the 67th overall pick in the 2024 NHL Draft, 3rd round selection. And he's still a young man, still only 18 years old, isn't going to turn 19 until next month in August. And he had 20 points, 7 goals, 13 assists in 37 games as a freshman with Providence in the Hockey East, which is, probably the best conference in all of college hockey, one of the best, undoubtedly for sure. But a very strong season for John Mustard. Productive, mostly playing third-line role, did get some opportunities up on the top line later on in the year. If I had to guess, unless something crazy happens this season, he'll probably be with Providence, or at least in college hockey, for 2 more years before turning pro. But basically, like every third-round selection the Blackhawks made in 2024, it's all about speed with John Mustard, one of the fastest players in the entire conference. Should make for a very interesting season. Definitely worth keeping an eye on what type of uptick in terms of the role and production John Mustard winds up having in his sophomore season with the Friars. I think there's a chance that he could be a middle 6 forward for the Blackhawks if his hands ever can keep up to his feet. Seems like there's a little bit of an Oliver Moore style thing there with John Mustard, but 6'1", 185 pounds, got some good size to him as well. Keep an eye on John Mustard. I have him higher than Aiden Thompson in this ranking. It was tough for me here But I do think just because John Mustard is still only 18 years old, he's almost 5 years younger than Aiden Thompson. And Thompson was a point per game player in his freshman year of college hockey, but he was 20 years old at that point in time, right? John Mustard was a 17, 18-year-old kid who had 20 points in 37 games. So not quite the production of Thompson's first season, but again, a much younger player who I think if he does wind up making it to the NHL will be in a very similar spot to Aiden Thompson. And then, of course, Mustard definitely has the higher upside over AJ Spellacy and Nolan Allen. So that's why I had Mustard coming in at number 17. Closing things out here for part one of my Blackhawks Summer 2025 top prospects list. Again, be on the lookout for part two dropping tomorrow, where I'll dive through numbers 11 through 15. At number 16 here today, I have Colton Dach, 6'4", 196-pound forward, has played some center at the pro level, but I really do believe he's going to be a wing if he makes it. He was a second-round pick for the Blackhawks back in 2021, 62nd overall selection that just turned 22 years old back in January. Saw him up in the NHL with the Blackhawks in 25 games last year, where he tallied 7 points, 2 goals, and 5 assists. Also was very productive with the Rockford IceHogs once again, 26 points, 12 goals, and 14 assists in 33 AHL games. Unfortunately, though, did get an opportunity to play with Rockford during the Calder Cup playoffs and was not very good whatsoever. 1 goal, no assists for Colton Dach in 5 postseason games. Now has 2 years of pro experience under his belt, has kind of been hampered by some injuries, never really feel like there's been a consistent flow of action for him really ever since the Blackhawks drafted him. Like that final year of junior when he was traded from Kelowna to Seattle, he was injured. Then he got injured at, the World Juniors. Just feels like there's been a lot of bumps in the road for Colton Dach. However, because of his size, his physicality, and the increased, I think, intenseness that he brought on the ice last year, which the Blackhawks reportedly told him they want to see more of that, gives him a good chance, I think, to be an NHLer. And that's kind of why it was tough for me to rank him between John Mustard and Aiden Thompson, because I do think Mustard and Thompson are definitely 2 more skilled players than Colton Dach. But at the same point in time, Colton Dach does have a pretty good shot of his own right. He does have a unique mold compared to many other prospects in the organization, and he has already put together 2 fairly productive years for the Rockford IceHogs at the pro level and looked decent in his first real NHL stint with the Blackhawks. I think between he and Landon Slaggert, he's the bigger of the 2 and is the more skilled of the 2. So that's why, Colton Dach comes in here at number 16, while Landon Slaggert was just on the outside looking in as part of the honorable mentions, even though I think they're very close in terms of like their upside and potential role here with the Blackhawks. Colton Dach is just the one to me who gets the edge because his shot, I think, is better than Landon Slaggert's any trait of his skill set. And then also Dach is just bigger than John Mustard and Aiden Thompson. And I think that gives him a chance to fill out a spot in the Blackhawks lineup where obviously they're not just going to be looking for 12 skill guys, right? They got to mix and match things well. And I think Colton Dach does have a really good shot to be that type of guy. So that's why I had him here at number 16, which I do think is still a little bit lower than probably most folks have Colton Dach in their prospect rankings. I've never really been the biggest Colton Dach guy. I don't ever think he's going to be like a super productive or consistent player in the NHL, but I think if he can add a little bit more of that meanness that we saw last year and continue to put on some weight and get over 200 pounds, like he could be a force out there for the Blackhawks in a very similar way that AJ Spellacy could be down the road. But I do think Colton Dach probably has a little bit more to him offensively than AJ Spellacy does. Hence why Colton Dach coming in a little bit higher here at number 16. So that takes care of part one of my Blackhawks Summer 2025 top prospects list. Let me know down in the comment section below how you think I did here on numbers 16 through 20. If you think I got someone too high, if you think I got someone too low, if you think I should have swapped one of these guys with someone in the honorable mentions category, let me know your full 2 cents down below in the comments. But coming up in just a moment, before I close out today's episode, still have to quickly break down Arvid Soderblom's latest contract. Just wanted to say thank you all real quick for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen. Here to start off your day. For your second listen, go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can find Locked On NHL now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, Arvid Soderblom and the Blackhawks over the weekend came to an agreement on a 2-year contract with a $2.75 million cap hit in order to avoid arbitration. And obviously, I projected Soderblom's new contract on an episode last week. I've also mentioned a couple of different times how interested I was to see both the term and the cap hit that Soderblom would be commanding on his next deal. So definitely wanted to react to this on the show here today, even though most of this week is going to be fully about my Blackhawks updated prospects list. 2 years, $2.75 million cap hit for Soderblom. First off, money-wise, it was definitely more than I was expecting. I mentioned AFP Analytics was projecting Soderblom to get a $1.7 million cap hit on a 2-year deal, although Scott Powers had brought up that it was likely going to be more for Soderblom. I projected he was going to get a 2-year deal at $1.8 million. I expected the $2.25 to $2.5 million range if he would be willing to sign a 1-year contract here with Chicago, but I knew that was probably going to be unlikely. A 2-year deal was always the most likely of the group. I'm not mad that Soderblom got $2.75 million per year. I just don't really understand it. And it was kind of the similar confusion I was having when going through Wyatt Kaiser's projected contract. I was like, I don't have a problem with the Blackhawks giving these guys this money. I just don't really know how we're getting here. And again, maybe someone in the comment section can let me know if I'm just like flat out wrong on this. But I outlined Anton Forsberg, who is, yes, older than Arvid Soderblom, but he signed a 2-year deal with a $2.25 million cap hit. And last year, he had a 2.72 goals against, .901 save percentage, and 3 shutouts in 30 games for Ottawa. Arvid Soderblom was 10-18-7, 3.1 goals against, .898 save percentage, has never had a shutout in his NHL career. That was the best season of his NHL career. He's never had a save percentage above .900. He's going to turn 26 in August. Like, I don't know. What am I missing here, Blackhawks fans? That's why I didn't really expect Soderblom to get above $2 million, like 2.25 at the absolute most, because just looking at the other contracts that some goalies got in the market this summer, it was all lower than that. So I'm just a little bit confused. Obviously, the Blackhawks can afford to pay Arvid Soderblom this, but I just don't understand how they got to that number, but ultimately it is what it is. But the 2-year deal for Soderblom is probably the most interesting part of this to me. I was outspoken about how I would have loved to see a 1-year deal, but I just didn't really see that being the resolution from either of these two sides. I figured they would probably have to meet in the middle somewhere on a 2-year deal, but obviously that could potentially crowd things up for the Blackhawks moving forward, because Drew Commesso, based on what we saw from him last year, especially in the second half and in the Calder Cup playoffs, like, he damn near could be ready for the backup spot by the midway point of this season. And now we have Soderblom on until the end of the 26-27 campaign. That obviously mucks things up a little bit for the Blackhawks in goal. And that's not even throwing Laurent Brossoit into the picture for this upcoming season, potentially, which I don't expect to be the case, but you never know with kooky goaltenders. So yeah, definitely interesting that Arvid Soderblom got a 2-year deal. You just got to figure, with that being the result, if Drew Commesso continues to ball with the Rockford Ice Hogs, you think it's either got to be Arvid Soderblom on the move either at this year's trade deadline or at the end of this season, or considering, we have to see how things go with Spencer Knight, obviously, but we're expecting him to now be the number 1 goalie of the future here in Chicago. With that being the case, do the Hawks think Drew Commesso is expendable? Do they wind up trying to trade him to bring in more help on the blue line or in the forward group? Those seem like the two paths now for the Blackhawks at some point in the future, considering Arvid Soderblom got a 2-year deal, who to me should not be as much of a priority as Drew Commesso is, but they also do need someone to be the backup for Spencer Knight this year. It put the front office in a little bit of a tough situation, but ultimately something's going to have to give at some point for the Blackhawks, and that as a result of Soderblom getting this 2-year deal, that was just kind of the confusion around all of this to me. $2.75 million. It's not what I think is a fair price for Arvid Soderblom, but again, doesn't hurt the Blackhawks whatsoever to be paying him that money in the short term. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it's available each and every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Find me on X at Jack Bushman 2. Check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Mondays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.